gathered together from the cosmic reaches of the universe. Here, in this great hall of the Signal Watch, are the most powerful forces of good ever assembled. Join us as we discuss all manner of topics across the multiverse of comic books, history, creators, storylines, movies, and more. The Signal Watch podcast presents Kryptonian Thought Beast, a comics podcast series dedicated to truth, justice, and peace for all mankind. Hello, and welcome back to the Signal Watch for our final podcast of the year 2020. With me today is...
Stuart. Hello.
And...
Jamie Steens.
And we are talking...
Wonder Woman 84, or WW84. However it's supposed to be said.
I think it's 84.
Ooh, 84.
So, yeah, this movie was released directly to HBOmax. At the same time, it was released to cinemas worldwide. Somehow people were seeing it before that. I think it must have been released in Europe or South America before it was released in North America. Reviews were generally less good than the prior Wonder Woman film from director Patty Jenkins and starring Gal Gadot and Chris Pine. Gadot, sorry.
I just figured out that was how to pronounce her name like 2 weeks ago.
Like you were waiting for him to say Gadot.
Well, that's how I've been saying it for a long time.
Let's go. We can't. Why not?
Yeah.
So we watched it Christmas night. I believe you watched it Christmas night as well, Stuart.
Yeah, afternoon. We went to a matinee, actually.
Okay. Did you see it on the big screen? What kind of theater did they put it in?
It was in every sort of auditorium. I actually ran the numbers to see what was the least crowded auditorium at my local multiplex and went to that one where we could be. It was in it was like a 500 seat auditorium, and it was like less than 10% full. So I was watching all the show times. Like I have the advantage of being able to tap into the analytics on each show time and see like exactly what is the usage, what's the capacity for each show time, and pinpoint the exact one where it would be the least risky, I guess.
And what was that? I'm curious. What time did you go?
11:30 a.m. on Christmas Day.
That
would do it.
Most people are opening presents though.
Yep.
So,
it was the first showtime of the day. Yeah. And it had to be in one of in the largest auditorium in the theater, because like they were showing IMAX, and Dolby Cinema ones, but because of the the renovated seating, right, where they have like all the recliners and whatnot, there's reduced seating capacity, and so it was more likely that those were going to fill up, faster. Plus, more people want to see it in IMAX, I think.
Right. Yeah. If you have the opportunity, of course. Yeah, I totally get that. And I definitely, while watching it, occasionally was like, oh, this was one of those IMAX shots. That was one of those
absolutely.
IMAX shots. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I'll come out of the gate and give a little bit of my background with Wonder Woman, and I think it's probably fair for all of us to do. I started reading, like everybody else as a kid, I watched the Linda Carter television show. One of my earliest memories, honestly, is
we would play Super Friends, and I would be Batman. My brother would be Superman, and this boy down the street would be Wonder Woman. And he liked to twirl like that. That's my memory, is like he had to change from Diana Prince to Wonder Woman a lot.
It's fun to twirl.
Yeah, I mean, we're like 3, of course.
Who doesn't like to spin?
Like I had to go find a place to go. Like at least my brother was Superman and could quick change. I was like, I gotta go find a closet somewhere and go change. We gotta go pull on this mask. My bat pole is not everywhere I want to be. But then I guess it was the late 90s. There was a well-received run after a few runs that had not been so well-received of Wonder Woman by Phil Jimenez, who's an artist-writer and has a very strong connection to Wonder Woman ever since that run, even though he hasn't done that much. He's done covers and he's done some crossovers with Wonder Woman in them, but that was really what tagged me to the Wonder Woman comics. And I've been pretty much have a straight run from then and have subsequently picked up every issue of the run that began in 86 with George Perez and runs through that Phil Jimenez run and then for a few years after. So I've read no small amount of Wonder Woman. I want to put some bona fides out there because, we talk about fandom in these kind of different ways. But I feel studied in Wonder Woman to some extent. I've read books by Les Daniels and the Lepore book that came out a few years ago. And, another book or two here or there kind of about the scholarship around Wonder Woman and kind of her origins. And was when they cast Gal Gadot, I had to look at Jamie to actually make sure I got that right. I was initially very skeptical. I was imagining much more of a Gina Carano sort of person. That in my head at that time was kind of who Wonder Woman was. After I can't say I loved her in Batman versus Superman, but she was also kind of not given a ton to do, I would argue, in that movie, other than kind of show up and go, oh, Wonder Woman's in this world and she's going to be important in the final fight. But then loved her in the initial Patty Jenkins movie. And honestly thought she was fine in Justice League. Like I thought she was, of the moving pieces of that film, thought she was fine. I'm a huge fan of the Linda Carter TV show, and whether Jamie likes it or not, it pops up on our TV from time to time. And anyway, that's probably enough. And Jamie, you've had to deal with this over this entire time.
My history with the character is way less impressive. It's probably very typical of, anyone that kind of is into comics, the Linda Carter TV show, the cartoon when we were kids, various incarnations of cartoons over the years. As far as comics goes, it's kind of just what you've handed me, like some graphic novels here and there, and some single issues here and there. So I have a basic understanding of the character. Stuart?
Me? So, okay. I did watch the Linda Carter TV show when I was a kid. When I was about 5, I actually told everyone that I knew, including my family and my teachers, that I was from then on going to go by Steve instead of Stuart, because I thought the character of Steve Trevor was the coolest guy I had ever seen.
That's an interesting takeaway from that show.
No, that's that's accurate. And I go back and watch the series now, and I'm like, what? Did I really think that? Yeah, that is actually why I went by Steve from the time I was 5 till I was about 18.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. Really? And so the legacy of Steve Trevor lives on every time I interact with somebody who just knew me from high school or whatever, and they still call me Steve. They know me as Steve.
That's blowing my mind right now. Yeah,
like a completely different personality, right? I started reading Wonder Woman not in comics but in children's books. I had a children's book that was like, it was like a little longer than like a little golden book, but it was kind of a simplified, children's version of a comic story where it was like, it was called something like Enter the Cheetah. And it was like, Cheetah's trying to she's working for some Russian spies or something like that. It had something to do with stealing secrets from the military, but it incorporated her origin story too. So it incorporated the whole, the contest, right? Where she, and that was my, for me, that book was always kind of my touchstone to her origin story, rather than the comics, because I didn't get into the comics later. I did eventually read the Mesner-Loeb's, probably not pronouncing that correctly.
That's how I pronounce it.
I read, yeah. I read those. I read the John Byrne stuff in the 90s I really liked. I felt like John Byrne had this thing where he was kind of going around fixing DC continuity, like whatever was happening. If there was some line-wide crossover going on, that he would his chapter of it in Wonder Woman would always sort of make it a little bit better. But I don't really, I didn't really find that book memorable, other than the fact that at the time, whenever everything seemed very generic, and it stood out. It stood out in those kind of line wide stories. So,
I mean, I like a lot of boys, growing up, reading Wonder Woman was just like, you just didn't do it for the most part. And when I started expanding kind of my interest in DC, which frankly didn't really happen, until I was like in early college. That was, I think the Byrne era was wrapping up and the Messner-Loeb's era was starting. But at the same time, it was also the time when they decided all the Amazons wore thongs.
Cool.
And I was like, I can't in good conscience buy this. I don't know what I'm looking at.
The art, the John Byrne art I liked better because it was more kind of classic comic booky art. The Messner-Loeb stuff looked more like the Jim Balent Catwoman school of, female comic book vixens, where it wasn't particularly appealing to me, and and I guess I kind of could see what they were going for, but it just didn't really ring true to me. It didn't seem like something that they ought to be forcing, I guess, on the character.
Yeah, agreed. I as much as I really didn't know much about Wonder Woman at the time, I remember picking up an issue and seeing all of Artemis's ass hanging out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was every single female character for a while there just was drawn in these kind of playmate poses, and
that's really
was just
off-putting.
Yeah, it was like everyone kind of becomes, even if the characters aren't
they're
written that way.
wondering, why don't women read comics?
Yeah, no, I mean it was off-putting even to me as a boy. Like,
yeah.
It just seemed like it was I don't know, it was written for older.
The words I would use are sad and desperate. I mean, I was like, if I want porn, I'll just go get porn. I'm 19 years old. Like, I can go get that.
Yeah. And that's why I didn't read Catwoman for a while too. For a long time, Catwoman, and specifically in the Jim Balent era, I just thought aside from being overly sexualized, it just was ugly to me. Yeah. It wasn't even
everything. Like you said, everything was kind of designed at that point to kind of be like they've got double E boobs and are constantly doing that weird spine twist, so you can see both ass and
right
boob.
With the arched back and stuff. Yeah.
It wasn't really till Darwin Cook got his hands on Catwoman that I think
right.
that got really
with the goggles and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the goggles era is when I started reading Wonder Woman again. I remember.
Boobs don't look like that.
It always reminded me of a Bloom County strip where they're all getting fired from Bloom County and all the characters, and they're trying to figure out what jobs they're going to get. And Steve was trying to get into comics because he's like, they all look like Dolly Parton and Zero G. But yeah, so anyway, I did finally get into it thanks to Phil Jimenez, and like that first movie, and then my thesis statement for Wonder Woman 84 is it felt very 90s to me, and my argument for that is back in the 80s and 90s, when someone would take over a superhero movie, there was no sense of responsibility to the comics or the character. And it didn't matter if they particularly understood how the mechanics of those kinds of stories worked. You end up with a lot of stuff that's, a little campy, and you end up with things like The Shadow that don't, might be fun but don't make a lot of sense. You get stuff that's maybe a little bit less fun, like The Phantom, that don't really make a lot of sense. You get the Batman movies, which I know we're going to circle back to, and which were kind of the calling card. And people kind of got sick of that kind of movie making with those last two Batman movies. And I think that was kind of what pivoted everything with, X-Men, and then you got Batman Begins for DC. And this movie really, to me, felt like a $200 million version of, with modern effects and all of that, one of those movies with more of a flavor of trying to do something a bit more. But man, there were just too many things in the movie that felt like, the basic point of the plot, or the basic plot point of having a stone that grants wishes, just blows the doors wide open for, like, you have to do so much rule setting in order for this to work. And because they're like, well, it's magic, it's superheroes, it's all fun, it doesn't matter, is you used to always be kind of the takeaway. That was, to me, felt like that was the movie. And I think Jamie said when we were wrapping up the movie, it was like, well, it felt like, well, you said it, you can say it again. But anyway, she's like, you can't possibly know what I was going to say.
No.
It felt like they needed to get Steve back, so they gave her the wish, and that set everything else in motion for what the script was going to be.
Right. Yeah, and honestly, I think they could have done the wish thing and made it work, like you said, with rules set in place. But it just spiraled out of control. Like, beginning with the Steve wish, for some reason, and I'm assuming we can spoil the hell out of this movie.
Mm-hmm. Apparently half of all HBOmax subscribers have already watched it, so we're good. It's a wish, right? Anything can happen. He could just go bloop and he's there in her apartment. But they have to take over an existing person's body to bring him back. Not only is that disturbing, but they never explain what
that's
happened.
not what she wished for, right?
Yeah.
Or is it? That never made sense to me, right?
I just thought she wished to have him back in her life. But to do it in that fashion is just, like, the moment that happened, I was just like, oh no, did they actually do that? I don't want this to, be the reason he's back. Like, it's weird. And there's a lot of, like, upsetting issues involved. Like, they had sex after that. Like, was that dude's body? Like, that's not okay. Like, they didn't have to do it. It's magic.
I'll tell you what. If Steve takes over my body, he's allowed to have sex with Gal Gadot.
What about Gal Gadot?
Oh, shit.
Oh, that's right.
Oh. You guys, I'm going to add a bell, I think, every time I say it incorrectly.
No, but to your point, like, that's not what she wished for, right? She didn't say, or I guess we didn't hear what her wish was, because she does it silently. But you can't imagine that she was thinking, boy, I wish that Steve would come back in some random dude's body who kind of looks like him, right?
Yeah.
She wished to have him back, and then you have to think some unseen entity interpreted the wish in this kind of messed up way, which happened again and again in the movie, but always in an inconsistent kind of way, to where I was thinking, why that person didn't really wish for that. They wished for something else, but then they got this, like the guy who wanted his homeland back. He didn't wish for a giant wall, but it's like there's somebody out there hearing it and interpreting it and saying, what way could I do this to, mess things up in the best way, or something like that. Or like when Barbara wished to be like Diana, she didn't wish to be like Wonder Woman, but yet someone with a sense of humor out there, the unseen character, interpreted the wish to say, okay, she wished to be like Diana. Well, I'm going to give her all the powers of Wonder Woman or whatever.
Yeah.
And I've seen even people say, well, there was some trickster god. I'm like, but they never said that.
But they never showed that. Yeah. And how was the thing I wonder too was how did Maxwell Lord know that he would be able to exact a price when he turned himself into the wishing stone and he granted people's wish, and he immediately says, okay, wish granted to the first guy. Okay, wish granted. And in return, I'm going to get this. And I remember watching that going, why did you think that would
they
work?
didn't explain that until later in the movie.
And then it did work.
Yeah, when Diana started losing her powers is when that became clear. Like there's a price to every wish. And so when he started doing that, you're right. The first time I was like, what is happening? Like that didn't make sense to me.
It doesn't make sense how he knew to even try it, right?
Right.
How did he even think to try it? And yet it worked out just the way he wanted it to work.
Like that's obviously the reason that he wanted to be the stone, but that made like when he first wished to be the stone, I was like, what are you doing? Like that's
I thought he was going to wish for more wishes by becoming the stone.
Yeah.
When he did that, and then it turned into this other thing, and
but there are no rules, I guess is my issue. There are no with good science fiction or fantasy, you can have magic or whatever, but it has to have rules so that when something happens, the audience has some sort of expectation of what's the result of this going to be. And I just found myself every time something happened, I just had to sort of wait for the movie to tell me, what does that mean?
I think this is an interesting point because the movie did okay critically and it's been like less well received, I think, by the wider audience. But I think about like who becomes a film critic. Most of them didn't get into it because they loved the Avengers so much, right? And so, it's like a lot of these things, kind of the same, I think, mentality that goes into writing something like this is, oh, it doesn't matter. It's all made up, so you can do whatever you want. And so I think some people, like I saw Variety was like, oh, this is a feel-good romp that makes you forget everything. I'm like, no, I spent the entire movie trying to figure out what was happening.
No, yeah, like my brain was in overdrive the whole time.
That was another problem I had with this movie. Like the first scene when she's a kid, that was great. I actually enjoyed that part.
Agreed.
The scene in the mall, I thought that was a rip-roaring good time. Like she was doing her Wonder Woman thing in her town and she was having a good time. She was having fun, and therefore I was having fun. And that's when the movie stopped being fun. I mean, she had like a brief night of joy that Steve was back. And then after that, she realized the consequences of what she'd done and was just miserable the rest of the movie. Like, it wasn't a fun movie. They could have even done something like with the wishes. Like, if you have any wish in the world, you can't tell me that there aren't kids out there going like, I want to rain unicorns. Like, everyone's wish was like something awful. I mean, aside from the guy that had cows in the middle of DC, it just wasn't fun. Like, they just weren't creative about it, and they could have been.
Yeah.
Well, I was about the consequences part. I wasn't sure, like how much weaker she really was, because it seemed like she was weaker because occasionally she would get bruised or bloodied, but she was still taking direct bullet hits, and she was fine, right? So I didn't understand. It wasn't like I felt like that needed to be a stronger thing. Like she had to choose to lose her powers for him. Like the bit in Superman 2 would have been a stronger choice if she had been presented with it. Like, okay, you can have him back, but you can't be Wonder Woman anymore. And she thinks about it and she says, okay, I'll do that. And then realizes it's wrong and then takes it back. That would have been a stronger, I think.
Yeah. And honestly, she didn't make that choice. He did. When they have their final conversation, he basically says, I can't. I'm
making this choice for you.
I've got to go. I'm leaving. And she turns her away and walks off, and she's crying. But that's not the hero's choice.
Yeah, I can't argue with that.
Yeah.
I just, there are so many things about this that it just, like I said, my brain was on overdrive the whole. Why was it set in 1984?
Good question.
It could. Okay, so if it's going to be set in the 80s, right? That they could have said something about the 80s, but they didn't seem to have that much to say about the 80s, except that it was a decade of excess or whatever.
Yeah,
and the fashions were funny.
They wanted to play with, the fish out of water stuff with Steve, and the clothing was funny in '84. But then also they had the nukes going back then, so maybe that was it. But even the nukes thing was confusing to me.
It felt like an afterthought. And in 1984, there's no reference to Orwell, right? As soon as I hear 1984, I think Orwell, right?
Yeah.
So why did it have to be 1984? Couldn't it have been 1985 then? Or a different year that doesn't sort of, connote this like police state, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea. The only thing I could think was what Jamie just said, it was, okay, well, if we set off this series of events in the Middle East, it would trigger a worldwide issue with the Soviet Union and the U.S., where today, if something happened in the Middle East, no one would blink. I hate to say that's the truth, but it frankly is. It's, back then, everyone was hooked to the, 6 o'clock news and what's happening this week in the Middle East. But they also then had to force a scene to occur in the Middle East that had nothing to do with pretty much the whole rest of the plot, other than, oh gosh, now we're raining down nukes.
And they steal a plane from the museum that has enough fuel to get them to the Middle East. I mean, look, I know it's a superhero movie, but that took me out of it a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I tried to ignore it because I'm like, oh, cool, they're doing the invisible jet. Yeah. That's cool. And I did like the fireworks sequence. That was
one of my favorite scenes. Yeah, it had a great line from Steve, when he was like, well, shit, Diana. There's radar, come on. And then, them flying through the fireworks. And it was a little bit cheesy when he was like, oh, this is what flying is really like. And then she can fly later. I actually bought that part.
I did too, but I was also like that for being movies about women's empowerment. We now have Steve pretty much telling Diana everything she needs to know across 2 movies.
Oof, and yeah,
and he's her entire motivation.
Yeah.
60 years later, right?
Yes.
So it's 1984. That means she has lived through World War II. She's lived through Korea. She's lived through Vietnam. She's lived through the civil rights movement, right? And during this whole time, we don't get any hint of what would have happened to her as far as like her disillusionment with, mankind warring with itself. Remember in the first movie that her entire, she was so convinced that it had to be Ares that was causing the world war, the whole world to be at war, because, man, and everybody was sort of trying to tell her, cynically, no, we just hate each other that much. We just want to kill each other. And she couldn't believe it. And after all this time, you would think there'd be some mention of what that would do to her, to see that, in fact, no, we really are that effed up that we're just determined to kill each other.
See, I totally agree with you. I think that's the direction they should have gone. And then on top of that, if they wanted to say, oh, this is how Steve comes back because she misses him so much, have it not be about that she's fixated on him, but that she is immortal and every friend that she makes, she sees grow old and die.
Yeah,
there's that be weighing on her.
Sure. You don't get any sense of that at all.
Yeah, not at all. Instead, it comes across as she has no friends and she's still mooning over her boyfriend who she knew for 2 months and has been gone for over 60 years.
The timeline on the first Wonder Woman movie, yeah, I mean, the what you actually see probably takes place over about a week and a half. So it's even, I think, less than 2 months, because we're giving a lot of time to the boat ride. Because from the time they get to London to the time they get to the front lines is 2 days.
Right. So it's even shorter than that.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's a cool guy. Steve's a cool guy. I like Steve. I'd still be pining over him for a while. But 60 years?
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
She's Wonder Woman. Like it just doesn't seem in character with her to close herself off from the world like that, unless the immortality thing is getting to her. unless the state of the world.
There's not a mention of that at all.
No, there's no mention of it.
There's not a hint.
They could have easily done that and had it be more poignant.
Yep.
Yeah, I think what they were trying to do, I'm just trying to guess, playing the little devil's advocate, is she is being Wonder Woman, so she's got to be secret, and she's not made the same decision Superman traditionally makes, not in the Superman movies of Zack Snyder, which is you have the secret identity, and that's actually where you live your real life. And the Superman thing is what you do when you're helping out. And she's, whatever, I think in this movie decided she's going to eat at sidewalk cafes, being beautiful by herself, and no one will ever talk to her. She'll be
the news report after she, helped people out at the shopping mall seemed to indicate that people didn't know who she was. This mystery woman helps people confusing. Out. So she's been around for 60 years and she has not revealed herself as Wonder Woman. She hasn't gone to fight, with the Allies or whatever. She hasn't gone, to march with the women's liberation movement, like the cover of Ms. or whatever. She hasn't done anything. She has never revealed herself to the public as Wonder Woman. Sense. And until like some petty thieves try to rob a jewelry store in a mall, and that's the event that she feels like after all this time I must reveal myself to the world. I didn't know. No.
These are the things that just made me angry.
Yeah, I mean,
and I think they're the kind of things that, again, if you just don't know or think much about this kind of stuff when you're making the movie, between her, I sincerely doubt Gal Gadot was reading a lot of comics growing up.
Saved it.
I don't think Patty Jenkins, and Jeff Johns was listed as the other screenwriter on this, which is no doubt why Max Lord is in the movie at all. I mean, if you know anything about Infinite Crisis, etc., but
he didn't feel like Max Lord to me, though.
No, he didn't.
He was not the character.
I get the feeling he wrote maybe a treatment, and she didn't really grok what Max Lord was about, and decided to go do this. Which, by the way, I both liked Pedro Pascal. Mm-hmm. I liked what the character was. They always change characters for the movies. I can live with it.
He had a better arc than Wonder Woman, frankly. Yeah. I thought he was more likable by the end. He had a better redemption. I wanted him to see the error of his ways and get back with his kid and all that stuff. I wanted,
Yeah, except he's very publicly gone and invaded a military installation, and that dude is going into a deep, dark hole somewhere in Leavenworth.
They didn't show it, but he's going to get arrested. I mean...
Yeah.
One last wish to change his appearance, and then he's fine.
Oh, geez.
So if you haven't read the comics, Maxwell Lord in the comics initially appeared in the Justice League Bwahaha era in the mid-'80s, which was, there was this, kind of, if you only know Donald Trump as the president, if that's your age, and as a TV show guy, back in the 80s, there was kind of this Gordon Gekko, this concept of like these titans of industry, and that Donald Trump had kind of propped himself up as one of those. And Maxwell Lord was supposedly this wealthy guy who was a corporate sponsor for bringing the Justice League together in New York and getting them eventually like their own embassy, so they were considered to be their own nation. It was a really interesting idea, and I say Bwahaha era because it was also basically, it went between action and sitcom in this era, in Justice League and Justice League Europe. Eventually, they figured out Maxwell Lord had some like low-level telepathic power where he could basically, the reason he'd become so successful is he could mentally push people to his will to do whatever he wanted them to do. And you always knew it was happening because he got a bloody nose. It was all very comic book villainy sort of stuff. And eventually he's exposed as a villain, became head of Checkmate as a villain, and and then eventually was using Superman to beat up Batman. And Wonder Woman walks in Infinite Crisis, spoiler from a comic from 15 years ago, and snaps Maxwell Lord's neck. And it was a big to-do in the DC universe at the time. at that point, he'd never been a Wonder Woman villain up to that point. You would probably more likely use Dr. Psycho as the villain in that place from prior to Maxwell Lord kind of stepping in. But Maxwell Lord, of course, has come back, blah, 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 in the comics. Too many reboots of the universe to talk about. But he was more interesting to me as the guy who was very subtly making people make decisions they otherwise wouldn't make that would benefit him. And I think somehow that all got wrapped up in the idea of how do we bring back Chris Pine? That's all I can think.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of half expected Chris Pine to be like the descendant, or Steve Trevor, like they did in the series, and a nod to the TV show. That's what I expected them to do.
It would have been so easy.
But the weird, him puppeteering some guy who happens to look sort of like him, who I guess was just nearby. There's no real reason that they announced that the universe picked this guy to be Steve either. It could have been anybody. It could have been, and it actually would have. It almost would have been a better, I don't know, a better joke for the universe to play if it had been some old man, or they'd reanimated his corpse or something else, something more, I don't know, grotesque. But
I know we're veering away from talking about Maxwell Lord, and we'll get back to him. But sorry, that scene at the end where she actually meets the guy who was Chris Pine was in his body.
Yeah, that's awkward.
It was not. I didn't think that was needed. It just reinforced what had happened.
Well, I thought she was going to go off with him.
I thought she was going to go off with him too. That's why
I did too, and I wondered maybe they decided to reel that back in or something. Maybe that had been part of the script, but it was a weird moment.
But the fact that neither one of them, as soon as they wake up in the guy's apartment, and then they start, for a minute they talk about the guy. I wonder what this guy's like. And then they just kind of move on. And that's the part where I was you guys realize that
friends and family that are wondering who he is, where he is.
This isn't okay, right? This guy didn't do anything. And yet he's now, where is it? Is he actually watching and feeling everything that's happening behind the scenes? Is his soul somewhere out there in limbo? Is he dead?
Yeah.
I would think about those things. I would wonder about those things.
Right.
Yeah.
And when he does pop back into, in the middle of chaos, and he's lost a week.
Yeah. You didn't think what happened? Yeah.
And the whole world has gone to hell. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, sorry, getting back to Maxwell Lord, I did enjoy Pedro Pascal's performance. I thought he was, really good in it. Really frantic. He was maybe a little bit scenery chewing, but I thought the role kind of asked for it.
But if you watched those late night infomercials in that era, and kind of really that was more of a thing in the late 80s, early 90s than the 84. It was so spot on for what those guys were like. Because it was usually real estate that they were trying to sell, Ponzi schemes with real estate. But and it was kind of a funny thing when it came on, because I was like, oh my God, no one under 30 is going to know what this is referencing. Which was true for a lot of the movie.
Yeah. But I did think his story overtook too much of the movie. They could have just used Cheetah. I mean,
we've barely talked about Cheetah.
Yeah, I know. I really enjoyed Kristen Wiig in this role. I just don't think she was given enough to do. Well,
we partly have barely talked about her because she doesn't have much to do.
Exactly.
Other than she's the nebbish, the loser.
The whole origin of her origin story, in a feminist movie, just seemed so off to me.
Is it a feminist movie though?
Well, I mean,
you could make an argument that it should be.
Wonder Woman is a feminist icon. It's not. It's not.
But the movie's not. The movie's not at all.
Totally not. And that's kind of what I'm trying to say. Awkwardly.
Yeah.
I mean, it just felt such like an 80s movie, not like a movie set in the 80s, but like an 80s movie where this woman doesn't get any male attention and she can't walk in heels and she feels threatened by her prettier friends, and so she wishes to be pretty. Like, she doesn't wish to have Wonder Woman's powers, which could have been interesting. Like, if she had somehow discovered that was, her deal, and then wished for that I could have gone along with.
Someone pointed out online, I don't know who they were, it was just a Twitter thing I saw fly by, that Stuart had yesterday pointed out it's a lot like Catwoman, Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman character.
Yeah.
But it also is Poison Ivy from the Batman movies. Uh-huh. It's also Jim Carrey's Riddler from the Batman movies.
Yeah.
It's the kid from Incredibles. He was a little nerdy dude who somehow, through his jealousy of the hero, becomes a villain.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about the little boy.
Yeah, I am.
No, from the family.
Oh, yeah.
Like, wait a minute. Okay,
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it's they point out quite rightly, this is a very specific superhero movie trope for some reason of, if the nerd gets power, they will become evil.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
But it's not, I didn't think it was even done well, though.
No, it wasn't done well, because, like, the first time she ever really uses her powers against someone, it's the guy that was harassing her earlier. Like, this possible rapist guy. And she beats up on him a little bit too much, but, I mean, she's angry. Rightly so. She just happens to have, like, super strength that she's not used to. I mean, that's going to have an effect. Like, that to me doesn't scream, oh, she's evil now. I don't.
Well, to me, it was the powers that made her evil. That's what bothered me, I guess. Is that, to me, a villain is someone who's already bad, and then they get powers, and then it exacerbates how bad they are, right? But the thing that she wished for, just to be a little bit, more together, like her friend Diana, not to be a superhero,
right,
but to just be like this friend of hers who's smart and sexy and has it together and has confidence. That's a totally reasonable thing for anybody to want, to a normal thing to wish for. And it seemed like the universe sort of, had it out for her and, like, karmically punished her for wishing that she was just, like, a little bit better.
The thing we're going to take away from you is your humanity. Like,
right.
That's awful.
That's terrible.
I mean, I will say, I'll actually defend that in the context of this completely absurd movie. Because it doesn't make any more sense than Wonder Woman losing her powers because she wants to see her old boyfriend again. I mean, there's no rhyme nor reason. They did it to do it because they don't know or care what the rules are for the magic wishing rock.
It's different if there's a choice, I guess. Mm. And there never was. In most cases, the characters are not presented, I guess, except for Maxwell Lord. He seems to just know that there's going to be a cost, and he's okay with it. But the rest of the characters, they have no idea. They're just told, you can have whatever you want. Just what do you wish for? And so then they do. And then the universe punishes them for in unpredictable ways that don't seem to have anything to do with their pre-existing character flaws or anything like that. It's just random.
It had more story, and I wish it had been more clear what was going on.
So there have been 4 different cheetahs in the comics over the years. There's Priscilla Rich, who's the original cheetah, who you'll sometimes see in Wonder Woman art, who's wearing like a little cat-eared cap and a skin-tight outfit and running around. And then there was another one who was, I don't know what her name is because she was only around for a little bit, but she was the niece of Priscilla Rich, and she had like long red hair and had the same cheetah costume. And then then there was Barbara Minerva, and then there was a dude who was eventually in the Phil Jimenez run, a cheetah. None of those people had, until a recent reboot in Rebirth, had any kind of connection to Wonder Woman outside of. They had their own thing going on. If you read those original George Perez comics, it's really fascinating. She's a really dark character. She's, Wonder Woman kind of gets in her way, and that's how they tangle. But she's got her own agenda. She's doing her own thing. And, movies like to have a good sealed system. And my guess is that in the Rebirth reboot of Barbara, they did something that was way more interesting than the movie, which was establish that as Wonder Woman was kind of coming into her own in man's world, she came upon this scientist. Now, she wasn't a gemologist. They did that for the movie, but she was basically ends up tracking down, she's an anthropologist, and ends up basically tracking down this temple where this cat god, blah, 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 and ends up being granted power by this like dark cat god. And that's how, if she eats the right herb or whatever. But there's a relationship that was established and it splinters, and it's a tragedy now, where this is like, oh man, that lady I had lunch with last week totally went bonkers, which is essentially what happens here.
Yeah, they don't really know each other.
They needed to have more of a friendship before this started, like to have any sort of emotional effect.
Otherwise, it ends up feeling like Jim Carrey in Batman Forever or whatever one that was.
Yeah, that was the one.
This kind of wacky person I know has gone over the deep end and now is causing problems for our costumed hero.
I guess my problem with Barbara's Wish is I have the same problem with the whole. I'm not sure what is the moral of the story. I guess you shouldn't want things for yourself.
Do not strive.
Do not strive to be better.
Let the pretty people.
I don't get
it.
People.
Yeah, that's another problem that I had. That they had almost two different morals of the story, because it starts out and she learns a lesson as a child that you shouldn't lie you can't cheat to try to win.
Okay.
And I guess that kind of folds into the wish thing, but not neatly.
No.
It's really vague. And they tried to tie those two things together and it just didn't work.
But she didn't know what she was doing. When she was in the race, she took a shortcut. But she didn't know when she was wishing on the rock or whatever.
Right.
And it was just an idle thought. It was just like, boy, wouldn't it be nice if Steve came back?
But I mean, if you look at how a normal story is structured, you'd think that lesson learned in the beginning would come around in the end, and it just never did.
Yeah. And frankly, I'd written up Wonder Woman from 2017 recently, and was kind of tracking in that write-up the word deserve. Like, what do people deserve? Which they did echo back to in this movie once or twice. But this movie, by not establishing rules or anything, also doesn't follow kind of those like you just said, the kind of like, if you're going to have the lesson, you kind of need to put the neon sign on it at the end. Otherwise, I mean, I think we're all sitting in kind of, we think this is what they were trying to say.
What am I supposed to learn from this?
Yeah.
I mean, we get on certain movies for, being too obvious about it sometimes, but this just didn't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, like Stuart was saying, it because what are they trying to say by saying, like, okay, so but you can't work real hard for your 60 years dead boyfriend to come back. Like,
yeah,
there, and we didn't see enough of Barbara to understand, like, how did she get to this point? What's her story, other than we see a 40-year-old woman acting like a teenager in a rom-com having to meet cute.
We see 2 minutes of her like stumbling over herself, and we're supposed to know everything about her.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what really bothered me about it was it's because I liked the first movie so much.
Yes.
And you were saying before how it seems like a 90s type of superhero movie, where one of the things about those movies was they didn't take themselves very seriously. Everything was set in kind of a fantasy world, like the heightened Gotham City or whatever, which I like, but we've now sort of settled into this nice balance of realism, like the MCU, I guess, tone that they've managed to set, where it seems sort of real but also sort of heightened, and they didn't do that in Wonder Woman 84. In Wonder Woman 84, everything is way over the top. everything about when all the scenes that established that we're in the 80s, immediately all the clothes are over the top, all the hairstyles are over the top. It's a caricature of an 80s setting. And I didn't get that from the first Wonder Woman movie. I felt like, while it didn't feel like a realistic depiction, it still felt like, I don't know, something that had something to say about the era and took itself at least a little bit seriously, to where you could have a scene like her crossing, the no man's land with the shield, and it meant something. It felt like that was a hard thing to do, right? It felt like an accomplishment, and nothing that she really does. I never had a sense for what she's doing. Is this difficult or not? Because everything just seems to happen. Like we're told, like I mentioned the bullets before, she's getting weaker and she's getting wounded. But then after we're told that she's getting wounded, she gets shot like 5 more times and she's fine. So I'm not sure what to think. Am I to think that she's on death's door now? Am I to think that she's losing her powers or not? Because then she's managed to get back up and she's still fine.
Yeah. I think your point about everything kind of being, there's the stakes are insanely high, while there's also feels like they're so high so fast it becomes an abstraction. And I appreciate the fact that of the things I liked about the movie, it was a nonviolent ending, right? She had her fight with the cheetah, but her resolution with Max, which I fully expected her to walk in and snap the dude's neck on TV. Like, I'm not lying. I was like, that's going to be a really weird tonal thing when that happens.
It'll be quite a tonal shift. And I mean, had it been a different movie, that would have been an interesting callback to Man of Steel, right?
Yeah.
But
I can't help but think that's why they didn't do it.
It may have been. I
didn't really buy it. I mean, on the one hand, I agree in theory that it's nice to have a nonviolent resolution, but I just didn't buy it. Her speech.
I didn't understand. Go ahead.
I didn't get why that would motivate him.
Just the scene where she's talking to, you don't know she's talking to the world yet. You think she's just talking very quietly to Max, which seems really odd at the time. And then she reveals that no, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to them, which them being the world. I mean, it's a bit of a stretch that everyone is watching TV right now. And also,
how does she know they could hear her?
That 3/4 of those people listening to her are going to go, screw that. I'm going to keep my wish. I mean, every single person.
3/4?
Well, yeah, it's
that's
probably
optimistic.
More than that. I was being generous.
Yeah. Geez.
I was being very generous. Yeah. It just didn't work for me.
It was something as loose as getting your wish. The other thing is I couldn't believe that no one had more catastrophic wishes, right? As soon as millions of people are making wishes, all of a sudden you should have like the world blows up or dinosaurs come back or it's raining donuts or something.
Yeah,
something that's just like completely off the wall, because this, the imagination and the desires of millions of people all of a sudden amplified is not going to be like, oh, it's mostly like our world, only now there are more nukes or something.
Well, and whose wishes are contradicting someone else's wishes too. I mean, there's a mess right there.
There should be like 50 people all of a sudden that say, I want to be king of the world, all at the same time, right? Yeah. And what happens then? They're all king of the world. Or I want the world to just blow up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's essentially two. I was saying this to Simon, and he actually reminded me of a third one. But there's essentially two wish stories, right? There's Aladdin, and then there's Monkey's Paw, and they reference Monkey's Paw here, right? Simon said, "You're forgetting Wishmaster."
You're like, am I?
So I've never seen Wishmaster. I'll assume that means a lot to you who have. So, but it's because it's so hard, because there's a reason people have avoided doing that. And it almost takes I don't care enough to do the mental exercise to work this out and game this out. And I don't think as DC is doing this thing, or Warner Brothers is letting their DC movies do this thing of like, we're letting creators have complete control, and we're going to do this splintered multiverse thing. They're not asking people to workshop what they're doing at that point. And we talked a little bit about Soul as well, Stuart, and like Disney has a way it works through stories. It has a story department, right? And Soul's actually Pixar, but Pixar is famous for...
Yeah, but they bounce
story.
Ideas off each other.
Yeah,
right?
They work through these things to say, what is the most impactful way? How is there a flaw in what we're doing here? And I even when I was in Screenwriting 101 in college, that was highly, highly valuable to sit in a room with 9 other people who were there to tear your idea apart. So what you came out of was kind of a diamond of an idea. Mm-hmm. And that clearly just didn't happen here. And if they'd asked, oh my God, when I know when they were making the first Iron Man movie, I think I've talked about this before on the podcast, but they had a script, they were getting in pre-production, and they flew in all these comic writers from New York. And they basically were like, you're doing the Mandarin? Full stop. Like, that's a super racist character. You can't start with the Mandarin. Yeah. And basically walk them through how superhero stories actually work. And you get the Marvel Universe out of that. I would have been much more interested to see if Greg Rucka had sat down with Patty Jenkins or Gail Simone, or name a person who sells well in the comics world who's worked on Wonder Woman, and see what pushes out of that. Who's, because as we've been talking about for an hour here, wishes are a terrible idea.
And I'm going to say I wish. I wish that they had made it a smaller story. Like the things that you mentioned, Monkey's Paw and Aladdin, mm-hmm. those are localized to Aladdin and a small amount of people dealing mm-hmm. with the Monkey's Paw, with the wishes. Mm-hmm. I mean, this, if you extend it to the entire world, that's just a giant mess.
Yeah.
It's hard to get, I think it got away from them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's with, okay, so he asks the president thing where he launches the nukes. Like, he didn't ask him to launch nukes. Like, that somehow...
He wished for nukes, and they were in the air when he got them.
Yeah. So one thing I was wondering, was that supposed to be Ronald Reagan?
Yeah.
Or was that supposed to be like a Reagan-esque amalgam president, like E.G. Marshall in Superman 2? Or was it some guy who just said, "I wish I was president"?
It could have been.
He's president. Right, I couldn't tell, and that's just an example of the things that are going through my mind as I'm watching the movie. Instead of like concentrating on what is the character motivation and what's happening in the scene, I'm just like, what is actually happening right now?
So after the nukes are launched, then Russia launches nukes in retaliation. Yeah. Those are not wishes, and somehow when everyone renounces their wishes, those go away. Like that. Didn't seem like it should happen.
Yeah.
That seems like a done deal.
The interesting thing... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think they tried to show by the wall going away and then the water coming in where there had been none, that they were trying to say something about, like, if you renounce it, you get the best of all possible worlds.
Okay.
But...
I don't know. It was just confusing.
Well, okay,
it was very confusing. It was,
right. Well, I mean, and I've some pals. If Max is listening to this, and all due respect, the idea. He said, well, sometimes you just gotta just sit back and enjoy something. My problem is once I see that thread hanging off the sweater, I don't just go.
Oh, well.
Yeah. Oh, well, I start pulling on that.
It depends how enjoyable the rest of the sweater is, I guess, to look at, because there are movies that I love that have problems, but mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, well, the rest of the movie is great.
Yeah, with this movie, I was like every 5 seconds, I'm like, oh my God, there's a thread. There's a thread.
There wasn't enough other stuff in it to love so that I overlooked it.
Yeah.
If it had been more fun, I would have overlooked it.
I will also propose something to you, Jamie, that I proposed to Stuart yesterday, which is if you remove the Maxwell Lord storyline it becomes a Jim Carrey 90s comedy. He's a guy who's granted godlike powers, and he has a son who just wants his daddy to spend time with him.
Oh, you're saying isolate his story.
Isolate that story, not take it out. Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Isolate his story.
Yes.
It just becomes about a guy who's very ambitious but a bit of a loser.
Yeah. No, that analogy totally works.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. That actually made me like the movie a little bit better when you said that. because then I thought, okay, at least I can see, at least I have a touchstone here. They're doing something that's recognizable. But honestly, then I thought back to those Jim Carrey comedies that you mentioned. I'm like, no, they did it better. Because there were actual rules in those movies that you could follow, and then he would do something, and you would I know what's going to happen next because I know what happened last time.
You have the whole
and
scene
I can extrapolate
trying to work it out,
right?
Or trying to get around the rules,
right?
And,
and that's the fun of it. And in this case, there is no rules. It's just like he wishes something, and then I just sort of wait to see what happens. I have no idea.
Yeah. This is a bit of a change of topic, but I was talking to my brother online about this earlier, and he actually had a real big problem with the cheetah costume at the end, which by that point I was like not even caring what Cheetah looked like. And I thought she looked fine. It was not a big issue to me.
I just didn't see.
It did make me think of, honestly, I was disappointed by the special effects in this.
What was his problem with it?
He thought it looked like the Cats movie.
Yeah, I keep hearing that.
Yes.
I mean, it's somewhat true, but it's also entirely comics accurate.
Yeah.
And
no, that's fine.
If you were to do Cheetah, Tigra, I mean, name a character, that's just what they've looked like for 25, 30 years. Like,
I just didn't like that it was all in the dark. That was my problem.
It was in the dark.
Well, but that's what you do to cover up iffy CGI.
Well,
because and here I was thinking that they had like 6 extra months to work on the CG than they had when they came out with the first trailer.
I saw last spring. I'll say that.
Yeah, but there's no real reason why it had to be in the dark. I couldn't really figure out what was going on, and I couldn't really figure out how the fight was resolved either.
I mean, even the scene in the beginning with on Themyscira, I can never say that right. Even that to me looked a little hokey. Some of those. I
really like the Amazon games being a part of the
I
lore
like
again
that too.
because I love the Amazon games.
Maybe it was partially because we were watching it on our small TV and not blown up hugely.
Yeah.
I don't know. It didn't look.
It wasn't seamless.
It was not seamless. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And they had 2 years to work on it.
Yeah, I will. I'm going to defend the look of Cheetah. The ending. I actually saw Patty Jenkins confirm this because she had a watch with me on Twitter thing last night, and my whole timeline became Patty Jenkins talking to people for about 2 hours, and Diana says, "I got these powers from my father." Well. When did she figure out she was Zeus's daughter? Like
her mother tells her.
Kind of at the beginning, but she says, "I made you out of clay," and was
made you out of clay, and then Zeus put the spark of life into you. So
I guess kind of, but they've been pretty specific lately in the comics about Hippolyta and Zeus, having more than a handshake friendship. So. I wasn't sure if they were going there. So she, of course, goes, "Well, how did he turn things invisible?" It's like, "Well, no, I have God powers," and turns the plane invisible as, which, I'll take it, whatever. If I can get an invisible jet out of it, I'll accept it. But that was Patty Jenkins said, "Well, she's now immune to electricity."
What? Because why?
That's because she's Zeus's daughter, and he's the god he throws thunderbolts.
Are we supposed to be able to figure that out?
Was I supposed to know that?
Watching the movie, but I didn't say anything about it. I was like, I think that's what just happened, but they didn't say anything about it because she's wearing metal armor and she just stuck an electrical cable into the water. She should be a crispy critter at this point. So, but she got Barbara, blah blah blah. But the thing I couldn't figure out was I was like, she has no reason to go inside. I guess the reason to go inside
just turn it off. Yeah.
Yeah. Is to go tell everybody to go be better people or whatever.
It's just going to do the same thing the villain's doing, only for a better purpose.
Yeah, I get, and that's logically why I think she doesn't just, because they're snapping electrical cables. That whole thing should have been turned off from the number of cables that snap. But yeah, I did enjoy kind of seeing the cheetah actually on screen and as like manic and crazy as she is in the comics. Like, there's a reason she's a handful for Wonder Woman to fight. But
I didn't see a straight line from Barbara to maniacal Barbara to Cheetah. I didn't see when she gets to the point where she's like, I want to be an apex predator.
Well,
I didn't get it. I was like, I don't see.
Biologist at the beginning of the movie, not a gemologist.
What are you talking about? Like, where did that come from? Like, it's just the only reason it's there is because the movie needs her to be a cheetah, and so and so she is. But it didn't come from anywhere, you know.
Yeah.
No. Had they done something where they established them earlier and had, you know, Barbara discovering the cheetah god and all this stuff, it was just too much. And frankly, it's part of the problem because Warner Brothers always wants to have two villains in every damn movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a big
and they
problem.
have since Batman Returns. And everyone every time says, why do you do this? It's too much. And but Warner Brothers is like, action figures, I think. And it's like, with your action figure this time, is it going to be Pedro Pascal in a suit?
Right.
I hate to go there, but do you think part of it was we don't think little boys will be into this if there's not a dude? But you know what? I'm going to take that back because Maxwell Lord was not in any of the previews. It was
a little bit, yeah, not nearly as much as his presence in the film.
I didn't even know he was going to be in it until I looked at IMDb. So
I just thought the whole Trump analogy, or if you will, or metaphor, him as Trump, all the stuff they did to ham-fistedly compare him to Trump was too much, and to the point where I thought they've now kind of bolstered this part more than it should have been, in order to make this analogy to because they want to be, you know, the movie we need right now, in quotes, right? They want to say something to our current place in history about, you know, the people speaking back to, you know, the populist, you know, revolution, if you will, that's happening. And that's, to me, that's why they're transparently putting it in the 1980s, because of that caricature-ish, the way to characterize the 80s as the last time that kind of the conservative ideology took over, and the Gordon Gekko, if you will, the old Trump image took over, and everything was about greed and what can I get, and this is sort of, you know, where it inevitably leads. And the movie has to be about the world, you know, in one voice rejecting that. And that's fine. And I like that fine, but it seemed to come at the expense of telling a story that made sense and that I wanted to see.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that killed it by taking place in 84 was chronologically they couldn't have, you know, they were basically also playing on the lyrics to the TV show The World's Waiting for You. And they make a few comments throughout the movie of kind of when is the world going to be kind of ready for Wonder Woman. But by putting it in 84, you can't ever have her on camera, right? The more powerful thing was not her laying in a heap on the floor with her extension cord hanging over there. It was her being in front of the camera and making that speech, and not doing it in this, like, I'm talking, you know, softly to you in this way, you know, over the roar of, you know, the wind and everything else that's going on in this sequence. Because honestly, if you asked me what she said, I have not a damn clue.
I have no idea.
Nope.
Yeah.
It was like
Some vaguely
something about the
inspirational
world's
thing.
great as it is. You need to see the
Yeah.
beauty in it. And then I was like, okay,
That's not strong enough.
No.
that's not an argument.
Mm-mm.
Stop trying to make America great again. Is what she said in so many words.
So yeah, I mean, the things I did like about the movie, one, when they showed the I can't remember her name, Artemis, whoever it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's a close up of Linda Carter eyes.
Oh, yes. I didn't get that until the end.
Yeah.
End sequence.
Everyone else seems to have a problem with that post credit sequence, but I was like, yeah, that's cute. I think it was. I thought it worked pretty well.
No, it was fine. Of all the other problems I have with the movie, it was so minor.
I thought, Kristen Wiig, for what she had, I mean, she didn't have many sequences, right? But there's a clear progression that as an actor, she actually does do in okay, and I don't know if she acted those chronologically or what. That's not how movies are filmed. So, at one point she's the nebbish, and then she's got a little taste of it, and then the thing where she's just wearing tights and her heels walking through the her workplace.
And then she's kicking the guy down the street.
Yeah, and then she kind of builds her confidence, and then you end up there. But she, her going to the gym and lifting the weights and all that, kind of finding delight in her newfound strength and all that. And so I did enjoy that. It was confusing when she showed up at the White House, kind of unannounced. Like, why is she here? Why? How does she know to be there? DC is a big city and very loud. I don't know how you'd know you're supposed to be there. But yeah, I thought Pedro Pascal, of course, we've talked about that, was I thought he was pretty good, kind of between kind of the injured youth who's now projecting these, various faces.
I have to say, the little scene in the end when he's reflecting back on his abusive childhood,
they didn't need
did
that.
not work for me.
I thought that made him too sympathetic, honestly. He's no longer, now I feel sorry for him.
Well,
and it undermines
to,
I just felt like it was too little too late, because he'd already done all this stuff, and now you're trying to make me feel bad for him. I don't. Ugh.
Well, I mean, I think there was, aside from Ares in these movies, part of the point has been people are redeemable, and I don't think that scene was necessary to get that same idea across. Of all you really needed was for him. He's already talked about, you already know he's a failure and a loser, and how he sees the world, was for him to have his speech with his son, having the inserts of his background.
The stuff with his son was enough for me.
Yeah. But that's again a story and directorial decision. And of the many things I think got probably cut out of this movie, why they kept that in, I don't know. Should have left they explained how the monkey's paw worked.
back to the Barbara for a second. Most of the movie's tone I felt was pretty light, but did it seem to you like the bit with the attacker went on a little too long? Where she's being attacked, that scene where it just, to me, it seemed a little, because I guess maybe because I saw it with my kids.
Oh.
But gosh, it sure did seem to go on for quite a while before Diana showed up, to stop things. And then on the flip side, when she gets her revenge, again, I thought, well, how many times do they have to show her kick the guy? I mean, it seemed uncharacteristically dark for the rest of the film.
I mean, like I said earlier, that the second scene didn't exactly work for me to look at her as a villain. So maybe they felt like it needed to be excessive to kind of push her over the edge. I don't know. I'm just trying to think through what might have happened behind the scenes.
I think you could have shortened the sequence with that guy. I think they were both setting it up for how bad this is going to be, potentially could be. And so you're somewhat setting it up for when you have him return and he gets kicked, what's going through her head, why that rage is there. Otherwise, you're doing a lot of shorthand and doing some assuming. And I think now we'd be sitting here going, didn't that seem, it seemed excessive when she suddenly, beat the crap out of this guy who just kind of like yelled at her on the sidewalk. So it's a hard thing to balance. I think they were, in the attempt to show the genuine, lack of safety and kind of, how dangerous those situations can really be. I think if it made you uncomfortable, I don't know if that wasn't entirely not the intention of both scenes.
Sure. The other thing that sticks out to me that we haven't talked about, I did you know when Chris Pine, when they were in, I think it was Egypt. It was Egypt, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They're in the middle, somewhere in the middle, and Chris Pine like gives her a look, and he's like, "I'm gonna fire this rocket or whatever," and she gives him a look back, like, "I know exactly what you're gonna do, and how I'm gonna respond." And then he fires the rocket, and she somehow uses her lasso as like a whip and whips herself onto the rocket in order to scoop up. Did you have any idea what she was going to do and how they were able to communicate this non-verbally to each other?
No, but I actually thought it was pretty cool.
Because to me, I was like, what in the heck? How?
Well,
how did she get from that look that he's going to fire the rocket and she should use her lasso to fly herself forward?
Movies, though, like there's just some crazy shit that happens that people are bounce off of each other, and
that's true. I guess there were a few instances where I thought the action mimicked the same way in which I could never tell, like with the wishes, what was going to happen. It was the same way with the action, where you couldn't see the setup and then see what she was going to do, and then she does it, and then you're like, oh, that was cool. But instead, she just does something completely unpredictable, and I'm okay. I guess she can do that then. Okay, I guess she can do that too.
So, I mean, they set up the lasso as being different, at the beginning of this movie with kind of that sequence on Themyscira of kind of how the Amazons actually use lassos.
In the games, right? Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, like this was probably 10 years ago, but a friend was over, and among my Wonder Woman whole thing, I also have some statues and whatnot around the house of Wonder Woman, and
some
a lot. And there was one with a sword, and this is kind of just before like the whole like 2011 reboot of the DCU, when they decided Wonder Woman was always going to be carrying a sword and shield. And
she used to be a pacifist.
Right, and that was kind of what my friend said, was like, I don't really dig on the version of Wonder Woman that's this like barbarian queen that DC seems to be leaning into. And she's like, that's just not the character is the lasso, because it's you can't do that. You can't have her have a shield because that's Captain America. He kind of owns the whole shield thing. But once you give her a sword, now what is she? And it kind of shook me, man. I was like, yeah, that's kind of a very true statement. And there's been this desire to, make her Red Sonja over the years.
The sword kind of makes her an aggressor.
Yeah. And
it just goes from one extreme to the other. Mm-hmm. Because for a long time she was this like she was turned off by man's world specifically because of our tendency to war on each other. Mm-hmm. And then you get to the 90s, and all of a sudden she's Worf. She comes in, she's in the Justice League, and every situation she's like, we should kill them, right? Yeah. What should we do about this? Kill them, right? Yeah. And it's weird. It was this weird kind of whiplash. Like, what is I guess that's the character now. She's just this, constant like warlordish fantasy barbarian character instead of the, spokesperson for we should all love each other and not make war and things.
And I think, kind of the realization of that and, her ending where I think they were going in the movie until I think Warner Brothers kind of forced Patty Jenkins to have the big bombastic ending, which she has recently came out and said she didn't intend to have, was, that the sword does nothing in the end in the first movie, right?
Yeah.
It just shatters.
That's the God killer.
Yeah. It turns into dust when it goes against his palm. And, and what ends up, I don't want to recap the ending of the movie, but I did appreciate that in this one, like not a sword was seen. Mm-hmm. She was doing everything with that lasso, and it stuff they never could have done in the 70s TV show, because there it was all, her getting, this poor stunt woman getting launched off of buildings and springboards.
Some of them were stunt dudes.
Most of it was Jeannie, what's her name? I can't remember her name right now. I'm a little bit embarrassed. But, I mean, I appreciate the fact that they stuck to their guns on this one. And as crazy as some of the stuff they did with the lasso was, I'll take it. That was one of the things I liked in the movie. And I will agree when he shot the rocket and she latched onto it, I did have that's what's happening. But it also
right.
It also called back to the right of Steve had seen her on the beach, and so he did the thing where he's like, get under this thing. And to me it was almost like, I don't have a shield, but I do have this, and I launch you forward with this. So
I didn't think about that. I guess that's true. I just
man. I'm not saying that's exactly what happened.
Most of the, until we got to the end scene in the first Wonder Woman movie, where it was basically just her doing the bracelet clash over and over again to varying effect. This time it's really powerful, and this time it's only sort of powerful. But until that point, all the action in the first movie was really well done. I thought it was clear what was happening. It was clear what she was doing. And how she was able to overpower, the soldiers. That bit that you referred to where she goes into the tower was really cool. It was really well done. And I didn't get that sense from this movie. It was, the mall scene was fun, but every time she used her powers, I was just it was the same way with the wishes. I was just kind of left saying, oh, I guess she can do that. Nothing had any sort of weight to it, to where, they set up something that she's able to do and then sort of follow through, and then you're surprised or whatever.
In all honesty, I think that's one of both a problem that you run into, like we said with the wish thing of I'm not sure Patty Jenkins knows that you're supposed to establish those things. Because we never really have like a training sequence. Like even Man of Steel has, Superman figuring out he can fly and how fast, and those sorts of things. And we never get that with Diana. But over the years, I would say that's honestly a huge problem in the comics. There's no baseline for who Wonder Woman is, except with a few key writers, because everyone comes on kind of going, oh, I get to do Wonder Woman. But you can tell about issue 3 of their 6-issue run, they got nowhere to go with this. They don't know the character well enough. They don't know kind of what the boundaries are of what she can and can't do. And I'm kind of willing to accept whatever, but it turns into kind of a mush by the end of, a lot of just the comic runs. And that's very much how some of that stuff. I was fine with the Egypt car chase. I was confused when she was injured. I was like, oh, were only her bracelets bulletproof and her armor this whole time? And then you find out 15 minutes later in the movie that was actually a problem. And I was like, wait, she's always been bulletproof? In general, I was okay with, the car chase and all of that. We not know what all the rules are and all of that, but it's the whole tick, nigh invulnerable thing. You're as invulnerable as the story requires. But that also led to the confusion then when she gets injured, and you don't find out till 15 minutes later in the movie that this is unusual. Because she got shot in the flesh, and Anyway,
I didn't know how concerned to be.
yeah.
I was like, is she dying? Do we need to take her to a hospital? I mean, yeah, I was. I
just thought it meant that she was losing some of her speed and her reflexes because she wasn't able to deflect the bullet.
Yeah. Why bother using the bracelets if she is naturally bulletproof?
Yeah.
So for that reason, I sort of figured that she wasn't bulletproof because up until then, she'd always used the bracelets or the lasso, right?
She bleeds all the time. So
yeah,
she's constantly like, having a Medusa bite her or, whatever things befall Wonder Woman. And that's always on, you're like, wear a helmet, stop not covering yourself because you don't wear, but that's always so they can draw all the scratches on her legs and arms and all that. So
how do you feel about Wonder Woman flying? Flying like Superman flying.
She's done it in the comics since Crisis. So
they've had her flying in the cartoons for years. So that doesn't.
Yeah. I kind of prefer her not flying, I guess, just because I feel like it takes away the need for her to creatively get places, or you no longer have the need for her to use the lasso or to get 3 stories up or that bit where she's using the lasso to like as a propeller or whatever. Like I find stuff like that more fun than just, she launches into the air and she can go wherever she wants.
So I'm going to go off the DC role-playing game from Mayfair from the mid-'80s for this.
Yeah.
But the way they defined her flight power in that was she did in fact have to like use her magical, not like Thor's hammer or something, but she had to she was essentially riding the wind current. So she couldn't just be
she's gliding.
On the street. Yeah, she's more gliding wherever she's going. That said, it was a little confusing of she's upset. She hurls herself into the sky, suddenly remembers what Steve said and is flying around. And
she hasn't figured this out for 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
Again, 60. Yeah. I can't help it but have a problem with that 60 years thing because it just seems like she would have so much would have happened to her. She would have fallen in love again, probably. She would have met more friends or colleagues. She would have gone through so many experiences. If nothing else, she would have gone through all these culturally monumental shifts, right? She'd be different, and she didn't feel different.
I mean, having had just watched the first one, she is a naive kid in the first one. I mean, she's essentially
she feels more like an adult in this.
Yeah, in the first one, she's basically having a tantrum because Steve won't take her to Ares, and he's trying to explain the world is complex. We can't just go to the front because the front is multiple places and hundreds of miles at each front, and there's not a dude sitting on a throne in a helmet somewhere. That's not how this is working. And she doesn't understand. It's also what gets her to get over that wall in no man's land because she's doesn't understand that that's a terrible idea.
But that's why the scene works. And that's why the movie works so well. She's too naive, but at the same time, he and everyone else is too cynical.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's her naive, and it's her not knowing that she shouldn't believe in the things she believes in. It makes her able to do those things because that no one else would even try.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing.
Just doesn't have that sequence.
Doesn't have anything like that. That's what I'm saying. I mean, all these nitpicks aside, that's the thing is there's just nothing really that struck me as inspirational about this
character growth.
No, I mean,
so let's ask that question because her arc is.
But yeah, so wanting Steve to come back, she gets him. Mm-hmm. It's not what she really wants, and so she begrudgingly lets him go again. Right?
Yeah. Which she should have been thinking about that the minute she realized her boyfriend was playing Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Right. It took her way too long to realize, given the circumstances. I think. If it had literally just been him returned from the dead, looking just like himself, without any caveats, except for now I can't. Now my powers are her leaving. I guess I can deal with that. I'll trade that. And then the world starts to go to heck. And then she's like, well, I guess I can't really trade that because people need me. That's more what I would have wanted to see, I think. But
now, I will also say there are, I've been on the Twitters since Christmas Day and have seen 1,001 takes on this movie. And some of the things I've seen, I just kind of roll my eyes at. I get you have an agenda item that you're upset that the movie didn't handle it exactly the way you wish it would have. I don't want to wade too much into some of the other issues I've seen raised because I think that's a longer conversation than Twitter can really handle. Not that I think I'm right on my side necessarily, but I think that there are sometimes debatable points on some of these things. We've really only hit kind of like narrative structural problems and some of the issues it has as kind of like, is this a representation of a feminist character? And it's a weird one. They announced today that apparently this is exceeding all expectations for what the movie was going to do.
But what are how do they know what the expectations should be? In such an unprecedented
to see it.
Right. Well, I know, and it's definitely the biggest release post pandemic, right? So that's notable. But I mean, a lot of people have been complaining that since the pandemic started and everything's shifting to streaming, especially, that it's very difficult to measure what is good, viewership on a streaming platform because all those things are more guarded than, say, like traditional ratings, right? Nobody really knows what it is, and the companies that manage it kind of guard it, right? So when it comes to box office returns, everybody sees what they are, and it's black and white. It's like you spent this much, you made this much, you did good. But nobody kind of really knows what the new standard is. And the fact that they immediately proclaimed it a hit and immediately said we're going to do a sequel, especially given the background of everyone in Hollywood is now mad at Warner Brothers for this new release strategy where they're putting everything day and date next year on HBOmax without having consulted anyone about it. Says to me that it was going to be a hit no matter what. And it was they kind of need it to be a hit, right? They kind of need it to not have failed. Their first hybrid streaming theatrical release film can't have failed. And so announcing the sequel right away and saying and coming out with a strong statement, saying it was a big hit. I mean, maybe it was, I guess, but I sort of expect that they would have said that regardless.
Yeah. I mean, I think we were going to get a third Wonder Woman movie out of this, no matter kind of what was happening, because the DCU movies have, Joker aside, have kind of been kind of all over.
Not great.
Yeah, and I can't imagine, what's going on even in Aquaman land, because Amber Heard's had so many issues, and what are they going to do over there? But but apparently, Warner Brothers came out today and announced they're going to do like 4 movies a year or something crazy like that, I guess, to try and compete with the crazy Disney announcement from a month ago. My hope is really that the people who made the movie don't do what Zack Snyder did, which is double down and create a culture and cult around themselves of this was perfect, everyone who doesn't get it is a fool. And, actually pay a little bit of attention. It can't be that expensive to get some of the, better writers involved with the movie.
Yeah, but you have to know that you need them.
Yeah. But, this I can only imagine what's happening with this movie on Rotten Tomatoes right now. And I really hope that, Gal Gadot is great. I'll always believe that. I think Chris Pine probably shouldn't return for another movie, or you're going to dismiss this entire point of this movie.
Yeah.
And so, I wouldn't mind seeing Kristen Wiig get more time as Cheetah. But I also hope they set it in the current timeline instead of doing it in the past, so we can acknowledge that she exists in the world, because I think that was a huge, huge plot problem. But
yeah, I try not to be down on movies just for not being the movie that I wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of the problems that I pointed out earlier are just, that's a different movie, I guess. If we had learned what happened to her during that time in between, and it had some impact on her. And
I didn't go into this movie, targeting it. I wanted to I've been looking forward to it for 2 years.
Same.
I really wanted to love it, and I just didn't.
And I expected to love it too. I was really quite shocked.
I'm hoping that now that I've seen it once, now that I know the issues, that on a second viewing, I'll be able to look at it differently and maybe pick up on some stuff that I missed because I was too busy being angry at it.
I had the same thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not in a rush to watch it again.
No, I'm not saying this week.
See, yeah. I'd say I watched Wonder Woman on Christmas, and then I came home and I watched Soul on Christmas. And both of those movies I could watch again anytime because they're available streaming. And I've already watched Soul 2 more times.
You actually had a comparison to Soul that I have not trotted out yet. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh, there was a bit where, yeah. I mean, I just mentioned that a lot of the themes are similar to where they're talking about the character is, trying to cheat. So the main character in Soul is trying to get back the life that he wants at the expense of everyone else, around him. Kind of the same way that Wonder Woman is. It's the same moral of the story, down to the fact that they finally have a character say the same thing almost to him that is said to Wonder Woman when she's a child. You can't win by cheating. But all the themes that are repeated in Soul are just handled so much better. It's such a delight to, yeah.
We know what happens to Mr. Mitten's soul when he gets bopped out of his body.
Right. That movie is they thought through all the implications of their strange, metaphysical rules of the world that they set up, and they were interested in all the questions you might have had, and they made sure, if not to answer them, then to at least sort of acknowledge that that's a question you might have, and it's fun. It's fun to watch, and rather than me just being frustrated at it the whole time, saying, "But what about this?" and "But what about that?" It's a I don't know. It's very frustrating for me to watch them both together like that, because it's like this is sort of the experience that I would have wanted, that they had set up, where it's good science fiction or fantasy where you set up a central conceit, right? Something that's impossible that's now possible, but what about all these unintended consequences? And what does this mean? And what does it mean for the character to try to get around the rules and things like that? And it's fun to anticipate what they're going to do and then see what they do that's unexpected. And none of that is present in Wonder Woman for me.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about the movie you wanted to see. Jamie, did you have a movie you wanted to see that this wasn't?
Honestly, I was trying so hard not to catch any spoilers that I was trying not to put expectations on myself for the movie. So no, I just wanted it to, thinking that it was set in 84, I was thinking it was going to be a lot of fun. And taking it out of, honestly, the first movie was set in World War I, which is bleak, and I had more fun in that movie.
Yeah,
it shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
We love a good mustard gas attack, though. Let's be honest.
Not the fun part, you know it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say probably the movie I wanted to see that this wasn't was really the story of Barbara and and Diana's relationship unraveling, and that just wasn't going to happen. And that was unfortunately like in the first 5 minutes or within 5 minutes of each other was, oh, this is how they're introducing Barbara. So we're not getting that. And there's a stone that grants wishes.
Yeah. Oh,
and
that was like, a big,
Oh,
no.
Like,
and it even looked crappy. It looked like a piece of plastic.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, all right. Well, we've gone on for like 2 hours. So
sorry about that.
Literally. So this is going to be one long podcast. I hope everyone stuck with us. There's plenty more to talk about. Do it in the forums.
The forums?
Yeah. There's forums now. But yeah, you tweeted us, let us know if you watched the movie, if you had thoughts, if there were things you thought we should have covered. We'd love to hear from you on the Twitters. I'm at Melbotis, at MELBOTIS.
At McSteans, MCSTEANS.
I've never done this before with the promoting ourselves on social media.
You don't have to.
You don't have to.
No, that's okay. I prefer people don't notice me.
Okay.
I'm good. I'm good with people not noticing me.
You're good.
Yeah, we'd love to hear back from you guys on the movie that seems to be the thing everyone wants to talk about since we're all stuck in our houses over holiday break. So, all right. Thank you.
Also, watch Soul.
Oh yeah, watch Soul. I guess that's our
that's a takeaway.
Oh my takeaway from Wonder Woman.
Great.
Go watch Soul. It's really good.
Wow.
All right, man. Have a great one. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotis. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. You can drop comments on this podcast and let us know what you think. We do have a Signal Watch Patreon, and if you're so moved, we'd most certainly appreciate your support. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies. You've got to be kind.